4 years ago, the world was shocked by the hacking of one of the largest film studios in the world. A subsidiary of Sony International, Sony Pictures finances and distributes films around the world. And with a potentially very offensive movie to the Kim Jong-un regime nearing release, it's no surprise that when hacked, North Korea was the first to be blamed. But what really happened and who is to blame? On November 24, 2014, there are just weeks before the release of the Seth Rogen and James Franco comedy, The Interview. Financed and developed by Sony, the film is a fictionalized attempt on Kim Jong-un's life and portrays the dear leader as an unstable and slightly buffoonish maniac. The project was always considered potentially sensitive, and prior to Sony's greenlight, had been passed on by other studios. Fear of a possible North Korean reprisal hung around the project, and given North Korea's previous abductions of famous Japanese filmmakers and international assassinations, they weren't completely unfounded. Yet surprisingly, it's Sony Pictures, a Japanese-owned company and one of North Korea's most hated international rivals, who greenlighted the film and helped develop it. That morning, Sony employees showed up to work, much like normal, only to find themselves locked out of their computer network by a screen filled with a glowing red skeleton and the following message: hacked by #GOP. The screen cryptically stated Sony had already been warned, and that this is just the beginning. The hackers also claim to have obtained all of their internal data, including your secrets and top secrets, and then a final warning that if they don't obey, they'll release the data to the world. A deadline offered by the hackers, 11 p.m. that same day, was ignored, which led directly to a massive dump of internal documents, unreleased films, and very embarrassing emails. Of the emails, racist exchanges between two of Sony's top producers were the most embarrassing, which led to public apologies. The finger was almost immediately pointed at North Korea, and for obvious reasons, with the FBI suspecting North Korea pretty early into the investigation. But were they really to blame? Nobody knows exactly how long the perpetrators spent hacking Sony, but per US investigators, the culprits spent at least 2 months eavesdropping on Sony and copying critical files from their network. Later in the investigation, one of the hackers involved claimed that they had had access for at least a year prior to the November 2014 ultimatum, an impressive amount of time for Sony to have had no clue their security had been completely defeated. The hackers would go on to claim that over 100 terabytes of data had been copied in the attack, but the claim was never confirmed. The attack was executed using a server message block worm tool, a form of malware, and included a listening implant to eavesdrop on Sony's most sensitive communications, a backdoor, a proxy tool, destructive hard drive tool, and destructive target cleaning tool. The FBI said that the components involved clearly suggested an intent to gain entry repeatedly, extract information, have the option to be destructive, and remove evidence of the attack itself. Other than a great deal of stolen emails, documents, and unreleased films, it's not known if the perpetrators actually destroyed any content within the network. But given the multiple redundancy taken with film scripts and final edits of films, the act would have been largely pointless anyway. Unknown to the public, Sony Pictures executives had actually received an email the previous Friday from a group called God's Apostles, demanding monetary compensation or Sony Pictures would be bombarded as a whole. The email had pretty much been ignored by everyone at Sony, with most completely missing it in the massive amount of daily emails, or discarding it as junk mail. Note to any would-be hackers: learn from thousands of struggling screenwriters and don't email your ultimatums or scripts to producers whose inbox are filled with thousands of emails each day. It will literally never get opened by the slave, intern, tasked with poring over each one for anything important. With their deadline ignored, the Guardians of Peace began leaking unreleased films online, which would go on to hurt Sony in the box office. They also began to leak other data to include the stolen emails in order to gain attention from social media sites and news outlets, yet didn't specify what they wanted in return. Sony immediately put its top IT professionals on the job and wisely contacted the FBI and private security firm FireEye to help protect Sony employees whose personal data had been exposed, repair their digital infrastructure, and find the source of the leak. 4 days later, though, a public report was already blaming North Korea for the hack. On December 8, 2014, another major dump of information was dumped by the GOP, along with language threatening Sony relating to the September 11th terrorist attacks. Big mistake. The terror-like threats immediately garnered the attention of U.S. security agencies, and what had been initially considered a nearly inconsequential criminal matter suddenly became a national security concern, with U.S. intelligence agency turning its attention against the Guardians of Peace. Nobody was surprised when North Korea was quickly being identified as the perpetrator. Most mysterious of all, however, was North Korea's complete loss of access to the internet for several days during early 2015, a feat which surely only the most powerful cybersecurity agencies in the world, Russia, US, or China, could have managed, and possibly a shot across the bow warning to the rogue state. Debate about North Korea's culpability continued though, with even Seth Rogen saying in 2017 that he wasn't sure it really had been North Korea. Yet the timing of the attack just weeks before the release of the interview didn't seem like a coincidence. There's also the fact that North Korea had petitioned the UN to block the release of the film, stating that a film portraying the assassination of a head of state was improper and dangerous to peace and stability. We guess that if you live in a nation where your head of state is a maniac who starves his own people and throws them in gulag, such a film may indeed be dangerous to peace and stability. The UN naturally disregarded North Korea's request and reminded the Hermit Kingdom that that's not how freedom works. There was also the specific threat made against the interview, followed by warnings such as how bitter fate those who seek fun and terror should be doomed to if people went to see the film. The threat said the world will be full of fear. Remember the 11th of September 2001. It warned people to stay away from the movie theater showing the film, and that if anybody lived near a theater, they should leave their house. Yet, doubts about North Korea's culpability continued, with many saying that it had been an inside job done by one of 6 disgruntled former employees who had both the motivation and the know-how to execute such an attack. But just this September, the U.S. Department of Justice at last laid out sweeping evidence showing that North Korea had indeed been behind the attack, and specifically naming one individual, Park Jin-hyuk, highlighting his attacks against Sony, the WannaCry attack, and a major theft from a bank in Bangladesh. Ultimately, it's clear that North Korea was behind the Sony Pictures hack, but what's even more clear is that you really should not threaten terrorist action against the US. Had the hackers left September 11th well enough alone, the hack would have been considered a fairly routine criminal matter and we might never know, but due to terrorist threats, the US not only discovered the source of the attack, but somehow managed to track down at least one specific individual. One individual that has to live in fear of extradition for the rest of his life if he ever steps out of North Korea again. What do you think about the Sony Pictures hack? Was it really North Korea, or are they just a convenient scapegoat? Let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to check out our other video, 50 Insane Facts About North Korea You Didn't Know. As always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you tomorrow.